Good morning and welcome back. Yesterday we were talking about flowering trees, which are trees that are like big pushed up parts of the earth. They're basically like a giant flower bed with the same type of flower. And these things produce nuts and fruits and things that humans like to consume, and also plenty of things that humans don't like to consume. Food for animals around. And they all have flowers. That's why they are flowering trees. But flowers can also just grow out of the ground. I wish I could tell you that we had gotten to the easy part where every flower is the same. But as you've probably noticed, if you are a human being that has eyes and is looking around, flowers are very, very different. And we'll go over some of those differences and why they're different, and we'll also go over a lot of the similarities. For the most part, a flower is going to have similar structures. It's going to have similar organelles, and they all serve a different function. So a stem is the thing that connects a flower to the tree or to the ground or to wherever the flower is located. And the stem is going to bring nutrition from the rest of the plant to the flower. And the plant really wants to send whatever nutrition it can up that stem to the flower because it really relies on the flower to have more copies of itself, to basically have its own kids. Now, from there, on the underneath part of a flower, you'll find something called the sepals. And sepals are like underpetals. So they are leaf-like looking structures that will hang out underneath where the petals are. And then the petals will look all different. Some flowers are very dull and some flowers are very bright, and they usually serve different purposes. And I'll go over why that is in just a moment. And then you have a structure called the pistil, and the pistil is able to create the seeds, which are the essential part of how the plant reproduces. And in some plants, this is all they need. And in other plants, these mini seeds that need to become full, mature seeds need to get pollinated. They need to have pollen. And the pollen comes from the stamen. And the stamen is going to be, in most plants, a different structure that's nearby. Now, sometimes a plant's stamen can produce the pollen, and the pollen can just go over to where the pistil is and pollinate itself. And these are self-pollinating plants, and there are plenty of them out there. But sometimes a plant needs some help. It needs something else to pick up its pollen and take it over to other plants nearby, similar plants, to their pistil. And so those plants need pollinators. And what is a pollinator? Well, most of us would say a pollinator is going to be a bee. A bee goes into a flower, sucks the nectar. It's going to make honey for its hive. The bee just wants the continuation of its species too, so the bee is going to go in and pick up some nectar. It's going to fly onto the next flower and pick up some more nectar, and then fly onto the next flower and pick up some more nectar. And as it does this, bees have these cute tiny little hairs if you look at them up close. And it's going to get the pollen from these flowers stuck in its fur. And it's going to bring that pollen that's stuck in its fur to the next flower and drop some of that pollen off there. But it's not just bees that do this. Hummingbirds do this. Little insects or anything that's going to come and drink some of this nectar and move on to the next thing is also a good pollinator. So it's really nice to have bees around. It's really nice to have hummingbirds around. It's really nice to have all these little pollinator species around because they're helping out the plants, which ultimately is helping out the humans as well. It would be really hard to grow food if you didn't have these pollinators around. And so sometimes, as I was saying in yesterday's video, like in certain apple orchards or at the orchards where they grow almonds, they have their own bees there because they want these bees to go around pollinating these things. And that happens a lot with man-made things. We have like an orchard tends to be a man-made farming place where we have all kinds of the same type of tree in one big cluster. And so then we end up with some problems because in the wild, it doesn't take that many bees to pollinate a few different trees. If there's a couple apple trees here, a couple almond trees here, but when you have 1,000 or tens of thousands of trees stretching across acres and acres of land, it takes a lot of work. It takes a huge workforce for pollinators to come and do that. So what you're going to see is a real variety of color and shape for the flower. And so these flowers that do need pollinators to come and help them out, they're going to make themselves more attractive. They're going to make the colors brighter. They're going to have all kinds of various beautiful colors, yellows and blues and purples and pinks, and you name it. There's a lot of really amazing and beautiful colored flowers out there. And usually the more bright the color, the more it really is begging for some attention. It's trying to catch the attention of these pollinators and saying, hey, come drink this nectar over here. Whereas the self-pollinators, who don't need those pollinators at all, they tend to be a little bit more dull. The flowers tend to not really mind whether or not anything comes to take their nectar. So we'll go over many more of these flowers in detail, but that's a good place to start. Some of the flowers that we'll study are complete flowers, which means that they have all those parts that I talked about that flowers have, and some flowers are incomplete, which means they don't have all those parts. And that's just how plants are, and that's how their flowers are. There are a lot of similarities and plenty of differences, so we'll get into those in the very near future. And thanks for watching today. I will see you all tomorrow.